The great hall of Ashbourne was full of light and noise the night King Darien made his announcement. Candles burned in rows along the high stone walls. The long tables were covered with food and the finest cloth the kingdom owned. Every noble family had been invited, and every one of them had come, because when the Alpha King of Ashbourne called a gathering, no one stayed home. And Darien stood at the front of the hall in his dark ceremonial coat, broad and straight, the way he always stood, like a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged exactly where he was. He was 29 years old, and he had been ruling this kingdom since he was 19. He was used to rooms going quiet when he entered. He was used to people watching him. He had never once enjoyed either of those things, but he had made his peace with them a long time ago. "The alliance between Ashbourne and Silver Ridge," he said, in the voice that carried across every corner of the hall without him ever raising it, "will be made permanent. Lady Seraphine of Silver Ridge has agreed to stand beside me as queen." The applause started before he had even finished the sentence. Lady Seraphine rose from her seat and smiled at the crowd, and the crowd smiled back, because she was exactly the kind of woman who made a room feel like it had been waiting for her. She was tall and poised, with dark hair and a quiet confidence that most people mistook for warmth. She knew how to speak to lords and how to speak to councils, and she had been raised from childhood to understand that marriage, for people like her and Darien, was always about more than two people. Darien watched her accept the congratulations of the court and told himself, as he had been telling himself for months, that this was the right thing. The alliance made sense. The politics made sense. His advisors had been recommending this match for 3 years. He had agreed. There was no reason to feel the way he was feeling, which was nothing, and there was no reason to be troubled by that nothing. He was a king. Feelings were not always part of the work. Somewhere deep inside him, his wolf slept on, unbothered, the same way it had been sleeping for years. He turned to reach for his glass, and that was when he saw her. She was moving along the far side of the hall, close to the wall, the way servants moved when they were trying not to be noticed. She was young, perhaps 22, with dark hair pulled back simply, and a plain gray dress that told him exactly nothing about who she was, except that she worked here. She was carrying a large pitcher in both hands, and weaving between the edges of the crowd with quiet, careful steps. Her eyes were on the floor. He did not know what happened next, or how to explain it, because there was nothing to explain. One moment he was standing there, glass in hand, watching her move. The next moment, something inside his chest lurched forward so hard that he actually pressed his free hand against his ribs. His wolf, which had not stirred in so long that he had almost forgotten it was there, came suddenly and completely awake, not growling, not pacing, just awake, the way a wolf stands when it has seen something and made a decision and is simply waiting for the rest of you to catch up. The maid slipped through a side door without looking up, without seeing him, without any sign at all that she knew she had just done something to the king of the entire territory. He stared at the door for a moment after it closed. Then he turned back to his celebration and smiled at something his advisor said, and he did not think about her again that night. Or so he told himself. Her name was Alara. He found this out from the head of the household staff the next morning, by asking what he hoped sounded like a casual question about which staff had been on duty the previous evening. The head of staff was a practical woman who had worked in the castle for 15 years and noticed everything. She looked at him for one careful second before answering, and he met her gaze without blinking, and the name was given without further comment. Ilara. She had worked in the castle for 3 years. She was reliable and quiet, and had never caused any trouble. She was assigned to the East Wing. He was in the East Wing more than usual for the next several days. He told himself he was not looking for her. He was simply making rounds. He had always made rounds. It was important for a king to be visible in his own house. He saw her 3 times in 4 days. Once in the corridor outside the council chamber, where she was carrying a stack of clean linen, and did not look up when he passed. Once at the bottom of the east staircase, where she was scrubbing the stone steps on her hands and knees, and was so focused on the work that she didn't notice him until he was almost past, at which point she sat back on her heels and lowered her head, and said, "My king," very quietly, and he said, "Good morning," and kept walking, because what else was he going to do? Once, from the window of his study, He looked down into the kitchen courtyard and saw her hanging linen in the low autumn sun, and she was humming something to herself, just barely, too quiet to hear from that distance, but he could see her shoulders moving slightly with it, and it was the most at ease he had ever seen any person look in his home. His wolf watched all of this with great patience and total silence. It did not need to say anything. It already knew. Lady Seraphine arrived for a formal visit 2 weeks after the announcement. She was charming at dinner and knowledgeable in the morning council meeting, and completely at ease in every room she entered. She sat next to Darian at meals and spoke to him with the comfortable familiarity of a woman who had already decided things. When she touched his hand once, making a point during a conversation, he felt nothing in particular. His wolf went quiet in a different way, not resting, not watching, just absent, the way it always was around people who did not matter to it. He noticed this. He said nothing about it to anyone. The storm came at the end of the week, sudden and cold, the kind of autumn rain that drops a full season's worth of temperature in a single afternoon. Darian had gone to the stables to speak to his stable master about a horse that had gone lame, and he was walking back across the outer courtyard in the rain, his coat pulled closed, when he saw her. Ilara was standing in the middle of the courtyard with an empty basket, completely still, the rain soaking into her shoulders and her hair, with the expression of a person who had made a plan, and the weather had not consulted it. She was not running anywhere. She was just standing there, deciding what to do next, apparently without urgency. He stopped walking. He took his coat off, because it was a good coat, heavy and dry, and she was getting soaked, and this was simply the reasonable thing to do, and he walked over and held it out. She looked at it, then she looked at him. "My king," she said. "I couldn't." "You're soaked," he said. "So will you be in a moment," she said. "Please, my king, I am fine." "Take the coat, Ilara." There was a small silence. He saw something change in her expression, not much, but a little, at the fact that he had used her name. "You know my name," she said. It was not quite a question. "You've worked in my house for 3 years," he said. "I should hope I know your name." She took the coat. She held it for a moment, and then she put it on, because she was practical, and the rain was cold, and she knew when an argument was already decided. It was too large for her, his coat, on her, and she held it closed with both hands and looked up at him with that steady, gray-green gaze that he had not forgotten from the first night. The rain was already wetting his shirt, but he stayed where he was. "Thank you," she said. "Go inside," he said, "before you catch cold." She went. He walked back through the rain to his own door and stood in the entrance hall, dripping on the stone floor, and his wolf sat very quietly in his chest and felt something very close to satisfaction. The coat came back the next morning, folded so neatly that he thought for a moment someone else had done it. There was a small piece of paper tucked under the fold. It said, "Thank you, my king." That was all. He put it in the drawer of his desk. Not on the desk, in the drawer, where it would not be a thing he could be asked about. The day of the bonding ceremony came at the end of October. The great hall was set up again, more formally this time, with the high elder of the territory at the front, in his gray robes, and the entire court arranged in 2 rows on either side of the long aisle. Lady Seraphine stood at the front in silver, perfect and still. Darian walked down the aisle with the measured pace of a man who knew every eye in the room was on him, and had decided long ago that this did not change anything he did. He reached the front of the hall. The high elder began the words of the old bonding rite, which Darian knew by memory because he had attended 4 of these ceremonies as king and had prepared for this one for months. And then, without any warning, his wolf rose. Not gently, not as a suggestion. It rose the way it had never risen before, with complete certainty, with total authority, with the force of something that had been patient for a very long time, and had now made a final decision. It surged forward inside him so suddenly that he staggered, one hand going to the altar stone to steady himself, and the hall went so quiet that he could hear the candles. Lady Seraphine's eyes met his. She was not afraid, because she was not a woman who frightened easily. She was watching him with a look that was partly confusion and partly something cooler than that. The High Elder had stopped speaking. Darien stood there at the front of the hall with 400 people watching him, and he listened to his wolf, something he had not done in 10 years of ruling, and his wolf told him the same thing it had been telling him quietly, patiently, for weeks. He let go of the altar stone. He straightened up, he turned around, and he walked back down the aisle. No one moved. No one spoke. He walked the full length of the hall, and he did not stop until he reached the servants' alcove at the very back, where Alara was standing, with a tray in both hands, and her eyes wide, and her face absolutely still. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I think I owe you an explanation," he said, very quietly. She looked at him for a long moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that you owe Lady Seraphine one first." He almost smiled. It was the first time in a very long time that someone had told him he was wrong about the order of something, and meant it, and been correct. "You're right," he said. "I do." The court was furious. This was not surprising. The Silver Ridge Pack recalled their ambassador within a week, and the alliance that had taken 3 years to build came undone in 3 days. His council met in emergency sessions. His mother requested an urgent private audience, and then, when he did not change his position, stopped requesting things and simply did not speak to him for 2 weeks, which was in many ways worse. Everyone had an opinion about the maid from the East Wing. Alara herself, when he sat across from her in the small side room where he had asked her to speak with him honestly, told him twice, very directly, without being rude about it, that she did not want to be a crown, and she did not want to be a reason, and she was not interested in being the resolution to someone else's political problem. He listened to all of this carefully, because she was right about most of it. Then he asked what she did want. She thought about it for longer than most people would have. Most people, when a king asks them what they want, answer very quickly, because they are afraid the offer will disappear. Alara sat with the question, the way someone sits with a question they intend to answer honestly. "I want," she said finally, "to be spoken to like a person, not like a servant, and not like a solution. Just like a person." "I can do that," he said. She looked at him. "You're already doing it," she said. "That's the strange part." It was not a fast thing, what came after. There were no sudden declarations. He did not arrive at her door with flowers, which she would have found ridiculous, and which she told him so plainly when he once asked if she would have liked that. She said, "Flowers die," and he thought that was probably the most practical thing anyone had said to him all year. What happened instead was smaller than that, and more honest. He spoke to her when he saw her, like a person. He asked what she thought about things. Small things, sometimes important things. And he listened to her answers, which were always direct and sometimes surprising, and never what he expected. She stopped looking at the floor when she spoke to him, and he noticed this, and felt, for reasons he could not have explained clearly, that it meant more to him than most things people had given him on purpose. A new alliance was built with Silver Ridge, eventually, through honest conversation, rather than arranged promises. It took longer and cost more in diplomacy, but it held better, because it was made between people who had chosen it. His council settled. His mother spoke to him again. The whispers about the maid from the East Wing moved on to other whispers, the way whispers always do when there is nothing new to say. Alara remained exactly who she was. This was, Darien came to understand, the most valuable thing she possessed. Not in the way that kingdoms measured value, but in the way that truth is more valuable than performance, and steadiness is more valuable than show. She did not remake herself to fit the space. She let the space adjust. His wolf, for the first time in 10 years of carrying a kingdom, was quiet without being empty, resting, not absent, present, not straining. He had spent his entire adult life believing that being a king meant knowing what everything was for, and deciding it early, and not reconsidering. He had been good at this. It had made him effective and reliable, and, in many of the ways that mattered for a territory, successful. What he had not understood, until the night a quiet young woman walked past him along the edge of a noisy hall, and did not even look up, was that the oldest and most honest part of himself had been waiting all along for something that could not be chosen by committee or built by treaty, something that simply arrived and made itself known, and asked him, at the very last moment, to trust it. He had staggered at the altar. He had walked away from the arrangement. He had stood in the rain without his coat and used a name he had quietly memorized. These were not the actions of a perfect king, but they were, finally, the actions of a man who was listening. And for everything else, for all the work of ruling and repairing and rebuilding, that turned out to be enough of a foundation to begin.